The morning the call came, the sky over Maple Grove was a washed-out gray, the kind that promised snow but never delivered it. The air was crisp, the neighborhood hushed, and the smell of cinnamon rolls lingered in my kitchen. I had been wrapping gifts, small things mostly, for the grandchildren. A knitted sweater for Lily, who loved to twirl in pink dresses. A puzzle set for Jacob, who always asked me to play with him, even when his parents were too busy. I tied each bow carefully, humming softly to the carols playing on the old radio. Christmas had always been our season. Since my husband, Robert, passed 8 years ago, the holidays were my anchor. Daniel, my only son, and his wife, Clara, had insisted every year that I come stay with them for Christmas week. I cooked, baked, told bedtime stories, and watched the kids open presents. It wasn't just tradition. It was family, it was belonging. So when my phone rang that morning and Daniel's name flashed across the screen, I answered with a smile. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said. "I was just thinking of you. Are we still doing Christmas Eve dinner at your place? I've already made my cranberry sauce." He hesitated. I heard it immediately in his voice, that pause, that dreadful, weighted pause. "Mom," he began slowly, "listen, there's something we need to talk about." Something in me went cold. "Oh, it's about Christmas." I laughed softly, trying to lighten whatever heaviness was coming. "You mean the menu again? Don't worry, I won't bring the fruitcake this time. The kids made that very clear last year." He didn't laugh. The silence stretched. Daniel, he cleared his throat. Clara and I were thinking maybe this year. It might be better if we did something different. Different, I repeated. "You mean at a restaurant, or a trip somewhere?" "No, I mean just us. Me, Clara, and the kids. You've been with us every year since Dad passed, and Clara feels like it might be time for our family to start our own traditions." The words hit me like sleet against glass sharp, stinging, melting before I could even process them. I tried to smile through the silence, though he couldn't see me. "I see," I managed, my voice trembling despite my effort. "So you don't want me to come this year?" He exhaled heavily. "It's not that we don't want you, Mom. It's just things have been hectic. The kids are growing up, Clara's been tired, and, well, she thought maybe it would be less stressful this way." Less stressful. My heart clenched at the word. Had I become stress? I forced my tone to stay gentle. "Of course, I understand completely. You deserve a quiet holiday." There was a pause, guilt maybe, but he didn't take it back. "I knew you'd understand," he said finally. "We'll call you on Christmas morning. The kids can say hi." I swallowed hard. That would be lovely. When the call ended, I stayed standing there, phone still pressed against my ear. The radio had moved on to Silent Night, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Silent Night indeed. I sank into the kitchen chair, my hands trembling slightly. Around me, the house felt suddenly enormous, every tick of the old wall clock echoing through the quiet. My eyes drifted to the gifts stacked neatly by the window packages, wrapped in gold paper and care. I'd spent weeks knitting Lily's sweater. I'd stayed up late to finish the puzzle I knew Jacob would love, and now they'd sit unopened. For the first time in years, I noticed how empty my home truly was. Robert's armchair sat untouched by the fireplace. The stockings I'd hung, more out of habit than hope, looked foolishly cheerful. The scent of cinnamon turned bittersweet. I told myself it was fine, that I was fine. After all, children grow up, families change, and I'd had many beautiful Christmases already. But deep down, something fragile inside me cracked. Not with anger, not even with grief. Just the quiet ache of being quietly replaced. That evening, I packed away the decorations. Each ornament I placed in its box felt like tucking away a memory. Daniel's kindergarten photo ornament, the little clay snowman Lily made 2 years ago, the angel Robert and I had bought on our honeymoon. By the time I finished, the house looked bare, stripped of warmth and light. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the faint snow begin to fall. Somewhere out there, my son was likely sitting beside Clara, planning their new traditions. I wondered if he felt even a fraction of the loneliness blooming in my chest. But I smiled just a little, because if there's one thing life had taught me, it was this: silence can be louder than words, and absence can be its own kind of presence. So when Christmas came, I would not plead or cry or remind him of all the years I'd given him. I would simply stay home quietly, gracefully, and maybe, just maybe, he'd notice what it felt like when I wasn't there. The first few days after Daniel's call passed in a haze. I moved through the house like a ghost, quietly, methodically, avoiding mirrors because I didn't want to see the woman reflected there. The woman who had spent her entire life loving people who could forget her so easily. Outside, the town was lighting up for the holidays. I could see my neighbors hanging wreaths, children dragging sleds down the sloping street, the occasional burst of laughter drifting through the frosty air. My house, though, stayed dark. I couldn't bring myself to turn on the string lights Robert had hung every December without fail. Robert, I still talked to him sometimes, though I knew how foolish that sounded. I'd sit by the fireplace, tea in hand, and whisper, "You'd know what to do, wouldn't you?" He always had. He had been the calm to my storm, the laughter to my worry. When he died, Daniel had been my only tether to what we built together. My son, our legacy, our purpose. Every ounce of love I had left had gone into him and his family, and now even that had been politely, carefully rejected. That afternoon, I decided to clean the study, the room that had once been Robert's office and later, my makeshift craft corner. The shelves were cluttered with photo albums, paperwork, and old boxes labeled taxes or Daniel business stuff. I was dusting one of the shelves when a folder slipped loose, scattering papers across the floor. Among them were old financial records, emails I'd printed years ago, and a copy of the loan agreement, the one from when Daniel had started his first company. I remembered that day vividly. He'd come to me desperate, saying the bank wouldn't lend him what he needed unless someone co-signed. I hadn't even hesitated. I mortgaged the house Robert and I had paid off together, just so Daniel could have his chance. He'd promised to pay it back in a year. He'd taken 5. I never said a word. As I gathered the papers, something else caught my eye, an envelope with my name written in Clara's handwriting. Curious, I opened it. Inside were a few printed pages, emails. I realized they weren't addressed to me. They were between Clara and someone named Megan, her friend from her book club. My stomach tightened as I read, from Clara Evans to Megan Hill subject. Holiday plans. I told Daniel we need to have Christmas to ourselves this year. His mother is lovely, but honestly, she hovers too much. Everything has to be her way, her recipes, her traditions, her stories. I'm 38 and still feel like a guest in my own home every December. It's exhausting. I just want peace. He needs to cut the cord someday. She'll be fine. Women like her always find something to do. I stared at the words until they blurred. Hovering, cut the cord, women like her. I let the letter fall to my lap. For a long time, I couldn't move. I had thought Clara loved me, or at least respected me. I'd helped her when she was bedridden during her pregnancy, bathed the kids when she couldn't lift her arms, cooked and cleaned while she recovered. I had been her mother when her own lived out of state. And yet this was how she saw me. The betrayal didn't roar. It whispered, like the sound of snow melting, quiet, relentless, impossible to stop. That night, I sat by the window with a glass of red wine, the letter beside me. The Christmas lights from the neighbors' homes blinked across the street, painting reflections on the glass. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I should have said no, all the times I'd rearranged my life for Daniel's convenience. When Robert died, Daniel had said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of you." And I had believed him. But I realized now I hadn't needed taking care of. I had needed respect. It was an unsettling thing, the shift that happened to me that evening. The grief began to harden slowly into clarity. I could see, for the first time in years, the imbalance of it all. My love had been a currency too easily spent, and I had spent it without keeping a cent for myself. I went upstairs and opened my closet. On the top shelf was a small, dust-covered box I hadn't opened in a long time. Inside were the deed to my house, a portfolio of investment documents, and the paperwork for the small boutique I'd once owned with a friend before retiring. I'd left the business years ago, letting Daniel manage the accounts. Looking through those papers now, I noticed something strange: transfers I didn't remember authorizing, names of companies I didn't recognize. I made a mental note to call my lawyer after the holidays, but it wasn't anger that filled me. It was something quieter, steadier, a decision forming, not from revenge, but from self-respect long overdue. If they didn't want me at their table, fine. I'd build my own, and this time I'd choose who sat at it. The next morning I took out my journal, the one Robert had given me our first Christmas together. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed, but I began to write anyway. December 15th today, I realized love can turn into habit, and habit can turn into invisibility. I've been invisible in my own family, but I will not spend another Christmas begging to be seen. As I wrote, I felt lighter. I looked around my quiet house, not as a place of loneliness, but as a sanctuary that was mine. Every creak of the floorboard, every photo on the wall, every memory belonged to me, not borrowed from someone else's life. The ghosts of the past still lingered: Robert's laughter, Daniel's childhood drawings, the echo of a life that once felt whole, but beneath them something new stirred: resolve. By the time night fell, I had made a promise to myself. I would not call Daniel. I would not send the gifts. I would not explain or justify or chase. Instead, I would act quietly, gracefully, and in a way that would make him remember who I truly was. He had told me not to come for Christmas, but I was going to give him something far greater than my presence. I was going to give him my absence, and let the silence do what words never could. 2 days after reading Clara's emails, I woke to a world washed in white. Snow had finally come overnight, blanketing the yard and softening every sound. The world looked peaceful, still, untouched, a perfect canvas for new beginnings. I sat by the window, my hands curled around a mug of coffee, and let the stillness sink into me. There was something sacred about mornings like this, where everything feels possible simply because no one expects anything from you. For the first time in years, I didn't have a to-do list waiting on the counter. No errands for Daniel, no cookies to bake for the kids, no phone calls to remind anyone of plans. Just silence, and for once, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like space to think, to breathe, to remember who I was before I became everyone else's mom and grandma. That afternoon, I called Mr. Collins, the lawyer who'd handled Robert's estate years ago. He was an old friend, the kind who still sent handwritten cards every New Year. "Margaret," he greeted warmly, "it's been too long. What can I do for you?" "I need to make some changes to my will," I said, steady and calm. "And I'd like to review some property documents while we're at it." He hesitated. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect," I said, smiling faintly. "I'm just ready to tidy a few things up." He chuckled. "Ah, the year. And urge to organize. I'll pull the files." But when I hung up, my hands were trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from something close to exhilaration. For years, I'd thought my life was something that happened to me, that my job was to keep everyone else happy, even at the expense of myself. But now I realized I still had power, quiet, patient, underestimated power, and I intended to use it. The next day I drove into town, the road slick with ice. The bank teller smiled when I walked in. She'd known me for years, and I asked to move several accounts. Most of my savings had been joint investments Daniel helped manage, but I still had my own nest egg. I opened new accounts in my name alone and made a few discreet transfers. Then I drove to the old community center, the one where I used to volunteer before Clara said I was spreading myself too thin. Inside, it smelled like pine and gingerbread. A group of volunteers was setting up a toy drive for underprivileged families. I'd always donated small things before, but this time I did something different. I wrote a check, a large one, under the name of Robert and Margaret Turner Charitable Fund. The coordinator's eyes filled with tears when she saw the number. "You have no idea how many families this will help," she said. I smiled. "Actually," I said softly, "I think I do." It felt good not out of spite, but because I was finally choosing where my love and generosity went. Toward people who needed it, not those who assumed it was owed. That night I wrapped the gifts I'd bought for the grandchildren and placed them in a box. Not to send, just to have them ready for one day, maybe another Christmas, maybe another family. I tied the last bow and sat back, watching the snow drift down outside. Then I logged into my social media account, something I rarely used. Clara posted a photo an hour earlier. Their big Christmas tree, gleaming and perfect. The kids in matching pajamas. Daniel smiling with a glass of wine in hand. Her caption read, "Our first Christmas building our own traditions, feeling blessed." My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. I simply whispered, "Good. Build them. You'll need them." On Christmas Eve, I lit a single candle and played Robert's favorite record, a soft jazz version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." The song always made me ache before, but this time it made me smile, because I finally understood the line, "Make the Yuletide gay. Next year all our troubles will be miles away." I'd already begun to move my troubles miles away. When I turned off my phone before bed, I saw a few missed messages from Daniel, casual ones. "Hey, Mom, hope you're okay. Kids say hi." Nothing that hinted at remorse. Nothing that said we miss you. Just enough to ease his conscience. I didn't reply. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke to sunlight spilling through the curtains and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I baked myself a small loaf of bread, fried an egg, and sat down to breakfast with the newspaper. I read every word slowly, savoring the quiet. Around 10, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. I could imagine their house bustling, Clara in her red dress, the kids tearing through wrapping paper, Daniel laughing too loudly to hide his guilt. I could also imagine the brief silence when they realized my call hadn't come. For years, I'd made sure they never felt the absence of anything. Now they would. 2 days later, the first wave of consequences began to ripple outward. Mr. Collins called me, his tone half amused. "Margaret," he said, "I've received several inquiries from your son this morning. Apparently he noticed some of the asset transfers. Already," I asked lightly. That was quick. He seemed surprised. Collins said diplomatically, "Would you like me to discuss the changes with him?" "No," I said, swirling the tea in my cup. "He'll figure things out eventually." I could almost picture it, Daniel, pacing in his office, confused by what he thought were his future assets now belonging to charitable foundations, scholarship programs, and one small trust fund in my name only. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who thought I was a burden was suddenly desperate to understand what I'd done with my money. That evening I sat in my armchair, the fire crackling, the snow still falling. My phone buzzed once, twice, then again. Calls, texts, voicemails, Daniel, Clara, even little Lily, whose sweet voice trembled in a message. "Grandma, are you coming next year? Daddy says you might not want to." I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. For a moment, the ache returned, that pull of maternal love, so deep it could never truly disappear. But I stayed silent, because silence was finally teaching them what words never had. By the end of the week, I had everything settled. My newel signed, the charity foundation established, the account secure, and my peace heart earned steady and mine at last. As I looked around the quiet house that night, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the sound of a woman choosing herself after a lifetime of choosing everyone else. I smiled, picked up my phone, and turned it face down. The screen flashed briefly before going dark. 18 missed calls. The phone buzzed again just as the kettle began to whistle. I turned off the flame, poured the water over my tea leaves, and let the steam curl against the window pane. Outside, the world was quiet, the kind of winter silence that feels both endless and forgiving. When I finally looked down at the screen, I saw the number. Daniel, 18 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 1 text. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. It's urgent. For a long time, I just stared at it. The words urgent and please looked strange coming from him. 2 words I hadn't heard together in years. I set the phone on the counter and carried my tea into the living room, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my slippers. The house was warm, the fire alive. I felt no rush to answer. I had been invisible for so long that it almost felt poetic to be the one holding silence in my hands. When I finally listened to the first voicemail, Daniel's voice was tight, anxious. Mom, hey, it's me. Look, I just got off the phone with your lawyer. He said you made some changes to your will, and something about new accounts. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay. The second one was shorter, but faster, a little more desperate. Mom, can you please call me back? Clara's worried. The accountant said your property deed's been moved into a trust. I don't even understand what that means. Why didn't you tell me? By the third message, the calm veneer had cracked. Mom, I don't get it. Why are you doing this? Clara said maybe you're upset about Christmas. But that's ridiculous, right? You said you understood. You always understand. He paused then, and in that pause, I heard it, the sound of someone realizing too late what they'd broken. Please, Mom, just call me. I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply peace. He was learning what I had learned months ago, that people only notice the silence when the music stops. The phone rang again, same number. This time I answered. Hello, Daniel. I said, my voice calm. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Mama, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. I saw. Why didn't you pick up? I was busy. I said simply, setting my cup down. I've had a lot of things to take care of lately. He was quiet for a moment. Then, more hesitantly, Mr. Collins told me you changed everything. The will, the accounts, even the house. Why, what's going on? I could almost hear the confusion in his voice, tangled with something else, guilt, maybe, though I couldn't be sure. Nothing's going on, Daniel, I said softly. I just decided to take care of my own affairs. I realized I'd been leaving too much unfinished. Unfinished, he laughed nervously. Mom, you didn't even tell me. You put everything in trusts and donations. Do you even know what you've done? Yes, I said. Every bit of it. There was silence. Then, in a smaller voice, is this because of Christmas? I let the question hang in the air. Then I said, it's because I finally realized that love isn't measured by how much you give up for someone else, Daniel. It's measured by whether they ever notice when you stop. He exhaled shakily. Mom, I'm sorry. Clara just thought, well, she thought maybe you needed space. I shouldn't have, Daniel. I interrupted gently. You don't have to explain. You did what you thought was right for your family. But you are my family, he said. I heard the faint crack in his voice then, a sound that startled even him. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said. That's the hardest part, isn't it? We never mean to hurt the people we take for granted. It just happens because we assume they'll always be there. He went quiet again. I could picture him sitting in that polished kitchen, the tree still lit behind him, Clara hovering nearby with worry etched across her perfect face. "Can we come see you?" he asked finally. "Please, the kids miss you. I miss you." My heart softened just a little. I imagined Lily's face lighting up when she saw me, Jacob running into my arms. The ache of love never really leaves you, even when you've been bruised by it. But I also imagined the quiet peace of this house, my sanctuary, and the woman I'd become in their absence. "Not today," I said. "Not this year. I need some time." "Time for what?" "To live my life without asking permission." There was a long silence. Then quietly he said, "I understand. I hope you do." I said, "Because I love you, Daniel. I always will. But I'm not going to keep proving it by disappearing into your life." He said my name then, Mom, in that boyish tone I hadn't heard in decades. It nearly broke me, but I stayed composed, my voice steady. "Take care of your family," I told him. "That's what I always wanted for you." And before he could say another word, I ended the call. The fire had burned low, glowing softly in the hearth. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, muffling the world in white. I set the phone aside and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, my son was realizing that love doesn't vanish when you stop giving it, simply changes shape. Sometimes into grief, sometimes into gratitude, and sometimes into strength. I breathed in the quiet. For the first time in years, I felt no pull of obligation, no guilt, just warmth steady and earned. A week later, a letter arrived from Lily, crayon handwriting uneven and bright. "Dear Grandma, Daddy says we'll all come next Christmas. He says we'll make cookies and you can show me how to knit. I miss you. I love you more than Santa. Love, Lily." I held the paper to my chest and laughed softly through tears. Children love without politics, without conditions. Maybe, I thought, there was still hope. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in Robert's old journal. Then I wrote beneath it, "When my son told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, I smiled, got in the car, and drove home. 2 days later, I had 18 missed calls. I didn't answer right away. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is silence, and sometimes silence is just peace." I set down my pen, poured myself another cup of tea, and sat by the window to watch the snow fall, soft, endless, forgiving. For once, Christmas was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, that was exactly how I wanted it to be.